There's not a whole lot that I want to say about Chapter 8 and Chapter 9, so I'm just going to combine both chapters into this one video. Chapter 8 is really important because it talks about how you use evidence to support the claims that you make in your paper. And what I really want to focus on is your role as the writer and what you need to do with the evidence that you want to use to support your claims. So, as the book says, you need to make your evidence speak. And what that means is that the quotes that you choose or the statistics or whatever evidence you're using can't speak for itself. Even if it is a direct quote, you might think, well, it's the author's words, what do I need to do with it? When you put it in your paper, you are taking the source's words out of context and putting it in your own context, which means you're taking it out of the article or book or whatever you're working from and putting it in your own writing, which means that you need to introduce it, you need to explain it, you need to connect it to whatever claim you're trying to make, and that's how you make your evidence speak. You can't simply put a quote in your paper and expect your readers to understand what you want them to get from that quote. And as the quote says up here, you can use your evidence to test, refine, and develop your ideas beyond just proving that your ideas are correct. So you can have your sources working together and conversating with each other, but it's your job to tie everything together and then to connect it back to your own writing. So you have got to do your job as the writer in order to make your evidence speak. That means you need to spell out what your readers need to understand, because if they have to guess or assume that they know what you mean, your credibility is going to be hurt and your whole argument is going to crumble because your credibility is damaged. Okay? So you have to make them speak. You have to let your readers know what it is that you want your sources, what your sources are telling them. There's a lot of work for you to do. It's not just about plugging in really good quotes, randomly. That's not the purpose of evidence. You have to do your work with it, and you have to explain things really well. As far as some sentence level information goes, you don't want to begin a whole paper or a paragraph with a quote, nor do you want to end a paper or a paragraph with a quote. You want to end on your words, and you want to begin with your words. Sometimes it might be appropriate to say as your hook that so-and-so once said this, and then go into your introduction. That would be okay. But you have to finish out your introduction with your own ideas and thoughts. So the problem I see more often is that people end a paragraph or a paper with a quote. And yes, a quote can be an extremely powerful way to end a paper, but you take the credit for the power that you end with, not your quote. You want that to be you. You want your reader to finish your paper and go, wow, they did a really good job, instead of, wow, I want to read the source and not this paper. So just be really careful where you put your quotes, and just make sure you have a sentence or two following that quote if you end a paragraph or a paper with a quote. Don't let your evidence do all of your work. I've kind of touched on the reason why you don't want your reader to do all the work for you. Because your reader's going to see that. I see it all the time, and I know exactly what students are doing when they just throw in a quote and then move on. You're not doing your job as the writer. You have to explain what it is that quote's about. So don't let your evidence just try to make all those connections that you're trying to make in your claims. That's your job. That's your point. And lastly, only quote what's necessary. Sometimes I'll see students quote quotes that are absolutely ridiculous. If it's something that you can very easily summarize or paraphrase, you shouldn't be quoting it. You only want to quote what you couldn't say any better, because sometimes as you're reading, an author might put something some way that you're like, wow, that's really powerful. That's when you want to use a quote. You don't use a quote just because, or because it's a requirement to have a source. You have to use your quotes carefully, because again, it reflects on your credibility. So quickly, evidence versus claims. A claim is what you're arguing. So in a body paragraph, the main point that you're trying to make is a claim, and then you use evidence to prove that your claim is plausible, or, excuse me, you just use your claim to just boy, I'm getting all screwed up here. You use your evidence to develop your claim and to prove your claim and to further your argument, to help develop, your thoughts through your paper. And if you have weak evidence, it makes for weak claims, and weak claims undermines your argument as a whole. So you have to be really careful how you have your claims and your evidence working together. And then regarding the types of evidence, there's a whole list here that the book goes through, and mostly what I want to touch on with that is that use the evidence that best supports whatever you're arguing or analyzing. So if statistics are really applicable to your topic, use statistics. Anecdotes can be really creative, can be really fun, can be really engaging. But just be aware of what types of evidence you're using and what could be the most effective. So the bottom line, use your evidence to support your claims because it's going to affect how your reader perceives you. How do you want to be perceived? Do you want to be perceived as a writer who knows how to conversate and bring multiple ideas together in one paragraph, or do you want to be perceived as a student who really has no idea what they're doing and quotes random information for no reason? So think about that. It all comes back to your credibility. So Chapter 9 is all about analyzing arguments, and I'm really not a big stickler on this kind of information because I think students at your level have a lot to worry about and a lot to think about and a lot to learn. And so expecting you to understand logic and how logic works and the different types of models that philosophers way back in the day created as theories of logic, I'm really not that concerned about it. So if you have a basic idea, great. If not, I don't know that I really care. I just want you to have a basic understanding of what these different philosophies of logic are, just so that you can see them in other people's writing and then hopefully reflect back on yourself to make sure that you are using sound logic in your own writing. So the syllogism is basically just a premise and a minor premise and a conclusion. And the Socrates example is the best one. I mean, like I say, I don't get all excited about logic. Let me see if I can find it real quick since I've mentioned it. Where are you? Oh, okay, there it is. That's what I thought. I just didn't want to get it wrong. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. And you'll see this kind of logic quite a bit because it's taking one premise and saying, well, if this is true, and then another premise is true, then you can base a conclusion off of that. But it's really hard to measure truth based on that. You can analyze if an argument is valid with that kind of logic, but not if it's true. Because if any of those premises are false, are you going to know that or not? And then the Tolman model is a reaction to the syllogism because it's not realistic. And really, I mean, sometimes it could work, but if you think about it, it's not super realistic. And I don't think you can go very deep with that kind of idea of logic. So instead, this model uses data, which is your evidence, warrants, which are the principles that connect the data with your claim, and then your claim, which is your conclusion. And that's what I just talked about in Chapter 8. So if you have a claim, you support it with evidence, but you have to have the warrant or the principles that connect the data with the claim. If you use your data, which is your sources, your evidence, to support a claim, but you don't connect them with the principles that you want your reader to understand, your logic is going to be invalid. So I like this model much better. So hopefully, I mean, that makes a little bit of sense. It's what I was just talking about in Chapter 8. When you have a claim, use your evidence, but you have to connect that evidence to your claim. Otherwise, there will be no warrant to it. Okay? And then the Rogerian argument is more about listening and perspective and having multiple points of view working together for a common goal. That reminds me a lot of synthesis. Synthesis is when you pull multiple sources together within one paragraph to discuss one topic. So you kind of did that with paper number 2. You were working with 2 different sources to explain how those articles were similar and different, and anytime that you use them together, you were synthesizing them. So it's more about perspective and having opposition and even things that agree working together for a common goal. And that's more of what this textbook kind of goes toward in terms of analyzing. Analyzing is not about being right and wrong, but just about understanding and seeing what's happening around you. So logical fallacies is probably one of the most important things from this chapter I want you to understand. There's a whole lot of them, and maybe you can recognize some of them in commercials and things like that. But this is, again, just another awareness. I don't expect you to be able to engage with a commercial and say, oh, this is this logical fallacy. There are a lot of fun activities we could do with this, but for the sake of time and this curriculum, I didn't want you to be overloaded with work. So I'm just kind of giving you a rundown. So just be aware of logical fallacies because it shows when there's a kink in your logic. And when you have an argument based on a logical fallacy, it will just kill your credibility. Just one logical fallacy just can completely negate your entire argument. Just think of politics. Think of presidential debates that you watch on TV, if you ever watch them on TV, excuse me, and how one false step in logic can just kill a candidate. So just be aware of them. I have some of the most common. Ad hominem is, that's Latin for at the man. It means that you're turning the attention from whatever you're arguing about to the person. And I mean, a personal attack probably has very little to do with an actual argument. Bandwagon, that's pretty much what it sounds like. Well, everybody else is doing it, so you should too. Hasty generalization and oversimplification and overgeneralization are really common in the 101 level. So those are the 2 that I would really suggest you watch out for, because I get a lot of students who say, oh, everybody does this, and very rarely do I ever fit into their everybody statements, and I'll tell them that and say, actually, I don't do this. So clearly everybody doesn't, because I know I'm not that odd and that weird. I'm semi-normal. So if I don't do what you think everyone does, that means a lot more people don't do what you think everyone does. Does that make sense? So be very, very careful about generalizations and oversimplifying something. And then slippery slope is pretty much just saying, well, if you do this, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and the whole world's going to end. You don't want to do that either, because you have no way of predicting that kind of stuff. So I don't know if any of this information was actually helpful, but again, chapter 9 is just all about logic, and really I just think you have a lot more things to worry about than getting really nitpicky about the logic of the articles you're looking at and the other sources that you're working with. So just at least be aware, especially of the logical fallacies and the things that you read and things that you see, and try to pick out different types of logic. It's not that it's bad information, I just choose to spend our time elsewhere. So if you have any questions, let me know. And again, hopefully you just have a basic understanding